class. Today we're going to start chapter 4. Now this chapter is going to be about the skin and different body membranes that we find within our body. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is body membranes. The functions of body membranes are to cover body surfaces, line body cavities, and form protective and often lubricating sheets around organs. Now these different body membranes can be classified into two different tissue types: epithelial membranes, and then connective tissue membranes. So again, we covered epithelial and connective in the last chapter. Epithelial are known for covering and releasing substances such as secretions from glands, while connective is used to often bind things together and be a site of protection. So in terms of epithelial membranes, there are three that we're going to talk about. The first one is cutaneous membrane, which is probably the most important one that we're going to talk about in this chapter. The next one is your mucous membranes. You have your serous membranes. And then of your connective tissue membranes, there's only one, and it's called a synovial membrane. Now, each of these membranes are going to be brought up in later chapters, depending on what body system we're going to talk about. So let's first talk about epithelial membranes. Again, this includes your cutaneous, mucous, and serous membranes. They are also called the covering and lining membranes because think about the function of epithelial tissue. These membranes contain epithelial tissue layer, but also contain a connective tissue layer. So these are multiple different tissues that work together to form a membrane. So this is a type of organ. So again, like I've already stated, epithelial membranes are simple organs because they are made up of multiple tissues that work together to perform a function. So let me go ahead and write that down. Multiple tissues work together to complete a function. So again, the most important one that I said we would talk about is the cutaneous. The cutaneous membrane is your skin. This is a dry membrane. Think about your skin. It can often get pretty dry. The outermost protective boundary of your body is going to be the cutaneous membrane. It is our first line of defense against any bacteria or viruses or things getting within our body. As for the construction of the cutaneous membrane, there are two layers. You have the epidermis, which is composed of keratinized stratified squamous epithelial. And we're going to learn keratinized. That is going to be a type of protein, and it helps just make sure that our skin has the strength in order to perform its function. Now, again, it is stratified squamous, so this is multiple layers of flat cells. And this is good because our skin is constantly flaking off, so we want to have multiple layers that keep regenerating pretty easy. The second layer is the dermis, and it is actually made up of mostly dense, fibrous connective tissue. So here we have a picture of cutaneous membrane, and it's just pointing to the skin of this lovely lady who is posing for us. The next one is your mucous membrane. If I had to give a description about your mucous membrane, it's often called a moist membrane. Think of what the word mucus means. The location is it likes to line all body cavities that are open to the exterior body surface. So this includes things like our respiratory tract, our lungs, and our mouth is all open to the outside. The digestive system, we take in food through the outside and it goes all throughout our digestive tract, from our stomach to our small to intestine, large intestine, etc. Our urinary system, and then of course our reproductive tracts all have exterior body openings. The function of it is for absorption and secretion. So for example, in the digestive tract, we're going to absorb different nutrients. During our urinary, our kidneys are going to absorb and filter blood, and our reproductive tract and our respiratory tract love to release secretions to help protect our body. If we're going to talk about the construction of mucous membranes, Epithelial type depends on where it's located. So it says depends on the site. Most are going to be either stratified squamous epithelial, or some of them can be simple columnar epithelial. Again, it's going to depend whether it's found in the respiratory tract, digestive, urinary, or reproductive. The one thing about it, and this word has been mentioned before, is that it loves to rest on loose connective tissue called lamina propria. So again, you have that epithelial layer and that connective tissue layer to form an organ. So here you have an example of a mucous membrane. So they took a transverse cut of your esophagus to show that the inside layer is going to be made up of mucosa or mucus cells. The next one we're going to talk about is your serous membrane. This is going to be located by lining open body cavities that are closed to the exterior. So these are going to be cavities that don't see the outside, does not have an outside opening at all, such as your dorsal and joint cavities. Sorry about that. So hopefully you remember your dorsal cavity are going to be things like your cranial cavity and your spinal cavity. Your brain does not have an external opening, and neither does your spine, because we do not want infections to happen in those two major important cavities, because they hold two of the most important organs in our body that help us function, that are part of the nervous system. The other one is your joint cavities. So joint cavities, these are going to be things that are going to be found at your elbow or your knee or your hip, anywhere where two bones connect. So anywhere two bones connect. Now, serous membranes, they're made up of simple squamous epithelium, and they are usually made up of areolar connective tissue. So again, there you have your epithelial, and then you have your areolar. Now, serous membranes are special because they actually often occur in pairs, or they have two layers that are separated by something called serous fluid. The first layer is called a parietal layer. This lines the wall of the ventral body cavity. And then you have a visceral layer. This covers the outside of the organ. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to show you a picture to kind of discuss these layers, the parietal and visceral, to give you a better idea. But let's go ahead and talk about what is serous fluid that is going to be between these two layers. So the serous fluid that is between these two layers is going to be a thin, clear fluid. It is often secreted by the membranes, and it is very, very important because it allows organs to slide easily across the cavity or against one another without causing friction. So it basically reduces your pain because you aren't having them constantly rub together. So here is where I'm going to talk about my parietal versus visceral layer. So where it's located, here on the left-hand side, we have a picture of a heart. This one we're going to learn coming up. This is called a pericardium. The outside, so right here, the parietal layer of both the heart and over here the lungs, this is going to be the part that is going to be not touching the organ. This is going to be the one where it might touch the cavity walls. For example, this one might touch the outside of the thoracic cavity, and this one might touch the outside of the mediastinum that it's in. The other layer, the visceral layer, the inside layer, this is going to be the one that actually covers the actual organ. So our visceral layer is covering the heart, and then over here our visceral layer is actually touching and covering the outside of our lungs. In between both of them, again, is serous fluid. A way you can think about this is if you were using a balloon. If you were to have a relatively flat balloon and you were to stick your hand through it, the outer part of the balloon wall would be an example of the parietal because it's not actually touching your fist. The air on the inside would be comparable to the serous cavity with the serous fluid, but remember, air is a gas and serous fluid is going to be a fluid. And then the inside of the balloon that's actually touching your hand, that's going to be comparable to your visceral serosa, your visceral layer. Now, there are specific serous membranes. There's called the peritoneum. This is going to be serous membranes that cover the abdominal cavity and the organs within your abdominal cavity, such as your stomach, your small intestine, your liver, etc. You have your pleura, which is going to be around your lungs, and your pericardium, which we're going to definitely talk about when we get to the cardiovascular. This is going to be around your heart, hence the word card. So think of cardiac, cardium. And the last one we're going to talk about is going to be focusing on connective tissue membranes instead of epithelial tissue membranes. Connective tissue membrane, there's only one that we need to talk about, and that is synovial membranes. Synovial membranes are special because they contain no epithelial tissue, which is why they're classified as just connective tissue. It is specifically composed of loose areolar connective tissue only. These different membranes line fibrous capsules that are located around joints. So they line bursae, which are just small sacs of connective tissue, and they help line tendon sheaths. They secrete a lubricating fluid to help cushion organs moving against each other during muscle activity. So they provide cushion within your joints so you don't have a bone rubbing against another bone. So here is a good example of a synovial joint. Up here we have a bone. Down here we have a bone. And in between them we have what's called a joint cavity. Over here on the side we have a ligament helping to attach the two bones together. So within this joint cavity, it also contains synovial fluid. So remember that synovial fluid is going to help cushion and prevent them from rubbing against each other. It's going to help reduce pain in your joints. And then here on the end of each bone, you have your hyaline cartilage that we learned about in the last chapter. That's also going to help. Whenever your synovial fluid gets low in joints, that's when you're going to start having some joint pain, or if your cartilage has started to wear down. All of this is very important because it leads us into what this entire chapter is going to be about, which is the integumentary system, also called the integument. The integumentary system consists of the skin, which is why we had to talk about the cutaneous membrane. If we had to describe the skin, it is waterproof, stretchable, and washable. It's invisibly repairs small cuts, rips, and burns. So I can get a paper cut and my skin will repair that. I can also temporarily burn my skin, and generally that's going to be repaired as well. It is waterproof. I can stretch my skin, and of course we take showers in order to get dirt off our skin as well. Skin also has appendages such as sweat glands, oil glands, hair, and nails that we'll talk about later in the chapter. So what is the function of the integumentary system? Well, it helps insulate and cushion deeper body organs. It protects the entire body from a lot of different things, including, but not limited to, mechanical damage, so if you bump your skin or cut it. Chemical damage, for example, acids and bases can get on your skin. Thermal damage, so if it's heat or cold, you probably have gotten a burn or frostbite. Ultraviolet or UV radiation, such as a sunburn from sunlight. It also protects us from microbes, and it also prevents us from desiccating, or other words, drying out. Other things that it also helps with, other than protection, is it helps aid in the loss or retention of body heat as controlled by the nervous system. So it helps make sure that we keep our body heat in and we stay within a certain temperature for homeostasis. Sweat glands and your capillary, or other words, your blood vessel network, is important for making sure we maintain that body heat. It also helps aid in excretion of urea and uric acid whenever we're sweating. And it helps synthesize vitamin D that we take in from the sun outside, which is very important for bone structure. So over here, this is an image that's taken from your textbook that tells the functions and how they're accomplished throughout the body. For example, ultraviolet radiation, we're going to learn how the skin produces melanin, which make melanocytes that protect us from that UV radiation. From desiccation, we're going to learn about how the skin secretes something and has something in it called keratin, which provides that waterproof covering. Here are the other functions and how they are accomplished. So for heat loss, we prevent heat loss by activating, we have heat loss by activating sweat glands and allowing blood vessels to flush to skin capillary beds, and that heat can be radiated off our skin. But if we want to retain heat, we prevent blood from going to that layer of the skin, and it keeps the heat from the blood deep in our body. And that's the end of today's lesson. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be more than happy to help you. And otherwise, I hope you guys have a great day.